All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving headfirst into a topic that's both super relevant and a little bit unsettling. Fake news.
Fake news.
You know it. You've seen it.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at some excerpts from Nolan Higdon's book, The Anatomy of Fake News.
Oh, good book.
And trust me, you are going to want to take notes on this one.
Absolutely.
We're going to be unpacking how to spot fake news, understanding its historical context,
Right.
and hopefully will help equip you to become a more critical consumer of information
That's the goal.
out there in this crazy world of media we live in.
Yeah, it's a jungle out there.
It is.
It really is.
It really is.
And, it's not just about being informed. It's about understanding how susceptible we are to manipulation if we're
Yeah.
not careful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fake news is not a new thing either.
Oh,
It's been around for centuries.
right.
And Higdon's book does a great job of tracing that evolution.
Yeah, so let's just jump right in.
Oh,
You mentioned manipulation, so can you give us an example of how fake news has had a real impact throughout history? Something that really drives home the point that this isn't just some, harmless little annoyance.
well, let's think about the Salem witch trials.
Ooh, okay.
You've probably heard the story.
Yeah.
But what's really fascinating is how fake news, in the form of rumors and accusations,
Right.
completely gripped that community.
Wow.
It wasn't just about religious extremism. It was about the psychology of fear,
Right.
social conformity,
Yeah.
and how easily a lack of critical thinking can lead to truly devastating consequences.
I'm already getting chills.
Yeah,
So people were literally accusing their neighbors of witchcraft based on, what, hearsay?
hearsay, personal grudges.
Personal grudges.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. And the scariest part is how quickly these accusations were accepted as fact.
Yeah.
There was this concept of spectral evidence, which basically meant dreams and visions could be used as proof of witchcraft.
Right.
Yeah, imagine being condemned because someone claimed they dreamt you were doing something evil.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
It's mind-boggling how easily an entire community could be swayed by something so flimsy.
it really is.
And you said this wasn't just about religion.
Right.
What else was going on?
Well, some historians argue that there were underlying social and economic tensions at play.
Okay.
The accusations often targeted women
Okay.
who were seen as outsiders
Right.
or threats to the existing power structure.
Interesting.
So fake news became a tool to ostracize
Wow.
and control those who didn't conform.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if fake news is always, on some level, about power dynamics and control.
It's definitely a factor.
Hmm.
And we see this pattern repeating throughout history.
Okay.
Look at McCarthyism in the 1550s.
Right.
Senator McCarthy used fear-mongering
Yes.
and baseless accusations to target suspected communists.
Yeah.
And he destroyed lives and careers.
It's like a playbook that keeps getting reused, right? Right. Create an enemy, stoke fear and paranoia, and then use that to justify extreme measures.
It's very effective.
And it's effective. Yeah.
Because when people are afraid,
Right.
they're less likely to think critically
Right.
and question the information that they're being fed.
So if fear is the fuel, what's the engine that drives fake news?
Okay.
How does it actually spread and gain traction?
Well, historically, you had things like pamphlets,
Oh,
sensationalized newspaper articles,
Oh.
word-of-mouth rumors.
yeah.
But as communication technology evolved, so did fake news.
Mm-hmm.
The printing press, the radio, television,
Right.
each new medium amplified its reach and power.
Which brings us to the internet.
Oh, yeah,
The ultimate accelerant, right?
absolutely.
Is it safe to say that the internet has completely changed the game when it comes to fake news?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The internet has created this perfect storm of factors that make it incredibly easy to produce, spread, and consume fake news. You have the speed and reach,
Yeah.
the anonymity,
Right.
and the ability to target specific audiences with tailored messages.
And then you've got these algorithms, right?
Yes.
The ones that decide what we see on social media.
Yes,
I've heard they actually contribute to the spread of misinformation.
that's right.
How does that work?
It's all about engagement.
Okay.
Social media platforms are designed to keep us scrolling and clicking.
Right.
And research has shown that emotionally charged content, whether true or false, tends to get more shares, likes, and comments.
So the more outrageous or shocking the content, the more likely it is to go viral, even if it's completely bogus.
Precisely.
Oh.
And the algorithms pick up on this.
Okay.
They don't care about truth or accuracy.
Right.
They just want to keep us glued to our screens.
Right.
So they end up prioritizing sensationalized content,
Yeah.
which often includes fake news.
That's pretty terrifying.
Yeah,
It's like we're caught in this feedback loop where we're
right.
constantly being bombarded with misinformation,
Yes.
and it's hard to break free.
It's hard to break free.
Yeah,
And it's not just about individual users sharing things without fact-checking.
right.
We also have to consider the role of organized disinformation campaigns.
You're talking about things like state-sponsored propaganda, right?
Exactly.
Wow.
Governments and political groups are using sophisticated tactics to manipulate public opinion,
Okay.
spread fake news, and even interfere in elections.
Right.
Remember Russia's Internet Research Agency
Oh, yeah.
and their involvement in the 2016 U.S. election?
Yeah, that was a wake-up call for a lot of people.
It was.
Yeah, it showed just how sophisticated these operations can be.
They really are.
They were creating fake social media accounts, posing as real people,
Uh,
spreading targeted disinformation.
Yeah,
It's like something out of a spy thriller.
it really is.
And it's not just foreign governments.
No, it's not.
Domestic political groups and even corporations are using similar tactics to push their agendas.
That's right.
So what's the antidote? How do we as individuals navigate this minefield of information?
Because it feels a bit overwhelming, to be honest.
Well, it's not about retreating or giving up on finding the truth.
Right.
It's about becoming more discerning,
Right.
more critical in our approach to the information we consume.
Okay.
And that's where the concept of real responsible journalism comes in.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
You're saying that the solution to fake news is more news.
Not just any news.
Okay.
We're talking about journalism that adheres to ethical standards,
Okay.
fact checks its information,
Right.
and strives for objectivity.
Okay.
It's about seeking out sources that value truth and accuracy over sensationalism and clicks.
So what are the hallmarks of real journalism? What should we be looking for?
Well, credible news organizations have a transparent process. They
Okay.
cite their sources, they correct errors, and they're accountable to their audience. They're not
Yeah.
afraid to challenge those in power and hold them accountable.
It sounds like the opposite of everything we've been talking about with fake news.
It's about transparency, integrity, and a commitment to truth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to understand that real journalism isn't just about reporting the facts.
Yeah.
It's about providing context, analysis, and diverse perspectives.
Right.
It's about helping us make sense of the world around us.
So how do we know which sources to trust? There's so much information out there. It
Yeah.
can feel impossible to sort through it all.
It's not easy, but there are things you can do.
Okay.
Start by being aware of your own biases.
Okay.
What are your preconceived notions about certain issues?
Right.
Which sources do you tend to gravitate towards?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
We all have biases,
Right.
and it's important to acknowledge them so we can be more objective in our evaluation of information.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And don't just rely on one source.
So,
Get your news from a variety of different outlets, both national and local.
yeah.
Compare how different sources are covering the same story.
So it's about being an active participant in the news gathering process rather than just passively consuming whatever pops up in our feeds.
Precisely.
Right.
And don't be afraid to dig deeper.
Hey.
If something sounds too good to be true or too outrageous to be real, it probably is.
Yeah.
Do your own research, fact-check claims, and look for evidence.
This is all great advice, but it feels like it requires a lot of effort.
It does.
It's almost like we need a whole new set of skills to navigate the information landscape these days.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And that's why there's a growing movement towards what's called critical news literacy.
Okay.
It's about equipping people with the tools and knowledge they need to be savvy, informed consumers of information.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's talk more about this critical news literacy.
Uh-huh.
What does it actually involve?
Well, critical news literacy is all about empowering people to think critically about the information they encounter,
Okay.
especially in the digital age.
Yeah.
It's like giving people a toolkit
Okay.
to deconstruct media messages, identify biases,
Right.
and evaluate the credibility of sources.
So it's not just about spotting fake news.
Right.
It's about understanding the broader media landscape,
Yeah.
the motivations of those who create and share information,
Yes.
and the techniques they use to influence us.
That's a great way to put it. It's about seeing the whole picture,
Right.
not just the surface level,
Yeah.
and recognizing that we all have a responsibility to be thoughtful discerning consumers of information,
Right.
because the consequences of blindly accepting everything we see online
Oh, yeah.
can be pretty serious.
Yeah, we've already seen how fake news has led to real-world harm throughout history.
Right.
But what about today?
Yeah.
What are some of the specific risks we face in the age of the internet?
Well, one obvious risk is the erosion of trust in legitimate institutions and sources of information.
Right.
When people are constantly exposed to misinformation and propaganda,
Yeah.
it becomes harder to distinguish truth from falsehood.
Yeah.
This can lead to cynicism, apathy, and a decline in civic engagement.
So it's not just about individual beliefs being warped.
Well,
It's about the potential for fake news to undermine democracy itself.
exactly.
Yeah.
Democracy relies on an informed citizenry
Right.
that can engage in reasoned debate
Yeah.
and make informed decisions.
Right.
But when the information ecosystem is polluted with lies,
Yeah.
distortions, and propaganda,
Right.
it becomes much harder for democracy to function effectively.
It's like trying to build a house on a foundation of sand. It's just not going to be stable.
It's not going to work.
Right.
And the problem is compounded by the fact that fake news often spreads faster
Oh, yeah?
and wider than accurate information.
Right.
Studies have shown that false claims on social media
Yeah.
tend to travel much further and
Right.
reach many more people than debunked or corrected information.
Why is that? Is it just because people are more likely to share things that are sensational or outrageous?
Well, that's part of it. But there are also some psychological factors at play.
Okay.
We humans are wired to pay attention to things that are novel,
Right.
surprising,
Yeah.
or emotionally charged.
Right.
And fake news often plays into those instincts.
Okay.
It's designed to grab our attention
Yeah.
and trigger strong emotional responses,
Right.
which makes us more likely to share it without thinking critically.
It's like a virus spreading from person to person through our online interactions.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
And just like a virus, fake news can be difficult to contain once it's out there.
Oh, yeah.
Even when fact-checking organizations debunk false claims, the damage is often already done.
So it feels like we're up against a pretty formidable opponent.
It can feel that way.
But we can't just give up, right? There has to be a way to fight back against this tide of misinformation.
Absolutely, we can't just surrender to the forces of disinformation.
Right.
And the good news is, there are things we can do,
Okay.
both as individuals and as a society, to counter the spread of fake news and promote a healthier information ecosystem.
Okay, so let's talk solutions.
Okay.
What are some practical steps we can take to become more critical news consumers and help stop the spread of fake news?
Well, a lot of it comes down to the things we've already been discussing.
Okay.
Being aware of our own biases.
Right.
Being skeptical of information that comes from sources we don't trust.
Yeah.
Doing our own research and fact-checking claims before we share them.
So it's really about slowing down, taking a breath, and engaging our critical thinking skills before we hit that share button.
Exactly. Don't just react emotionally.
Okay.
Ask yourself, does this information make sense?
Right.
Does it align with what I already know about the world?
Right.
What are the sources?
Yeah.
Who benefits from this information being spread?
It's almost like we need to become detectives, examining the evidence before we draw any conclusions.
And part of that detective work involves being aware of the techniques
Okay.
that are often used to spread fake news. For example, be wary of headlines that are overly sensational
Right.
or designed to evoke strong emotional responses.
Oh, yeah, those clickbait headlines. I've
Yeah.
definitely fallen for those before.
We all have.
Yeah.
It's easy to get sucked in.
Right.
But if a headline seems too good to be true or too outrageous to be real, it probably is.
Right.
Always check the source of the information
Okay.
and see if it's coming from a credible news organization.
So how do we determine if a source is credible? What are some red flags we should be looking for?
Well, one obvious red flag is if a website has a history of publishing false or misleading information.
Right.
You can use fact-checking websites
Okay.
like Snopes and PolitiFact
Yeah.
to check the track record of a source.
That's a great tip.
Yeah.
It's like checking someone's credentials before you trust their medical advice.
Exactly.
Right.
And pay attention to the website's design and overall tone.
Right.
Does it look professional and credible,
Right.
or does it seem amateurish or biased?
I've noticed that a lot of fake news websites have really strange names
Right.
or web addresses that don't make much sense.
That's a good observation.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll mimic the names or logos
Yeah.
of legitimate news organizations to try to trick people.
It's like they're trying to create counterfeit news.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
So be on the lookout for those subtle clues that might indicate a source isn't what it seems.
Okay, so we've talked about fact-checking websites and being aware of misleading website designs.
Right.
What other tools or strategies can we use to identify fake news?
One really useful technique is called lateral reading.
Lateral reading.
Yeah, it's basically the idea of opening multiple tabs in your browser
Okay.
and researching the source of a claim or the people involved in a story.
So instead of just reading one article and taking it at face value,
Right.
we're expanding our investigation and getting different perspectives.
Exactly. See what other credible sources are saying about the same topic. Look up the author or the website on Wikipedia or Google
Okay.
to see if they have a history of bias or spreading misinformation.
It sounds like it's all about being proactive and taking that extra step to verify information before we accept it as true.
And don't be afraid to ask for help.
Oh, right.
If you're unsure about the validity of something you see online,
Yeah.
talk to a trusted friend or family member,
Yeah.
or reach out to a librarian or a teacher.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
We don't have to do this alone.
Right.
There are resources and people who can help us navigate this complex information landscape.
And the more we practice these skills, the better we'll become at recognizing and resisting fake news.
It's like building a mental muscle,
Yeah.
strengthening our ability to think critically
Yes.
and discern truth from falsehood.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And it's a muscle we need to exercise regularly,
Absolutely.
especially in today's world.
So beyond these individual efforts, what can be done on a larger scale to address the problem of fake news?
Yeah.
Is there a role for governments,
Sure.
social media companies, or educational institutions?
Absolutely. This is a complex issue that requires a multifaceted approach.
Okay.
Governments have a role to play in combating disinformation campaigns
Right.
and promoting media literacy,
Right.
but it's important to do so in a way that respects freedom of speech and avoids censorship.
It's a delicate balance, right?
It is.
We don't want to stifle free expression,
No.
but we also need to protect ourselves from harmful misinformation.
Exactly. And social media companies have a responsibility to address the ways in which their platforms are being used to spread fake news.
Yeah.
They need to take steps to improve their algorithms,
Okay.
limit the spread of false content,
Right.
and make it easier for users to report misinformation.
It feels like there's a growing awareness of this issue.
I think so.
And some platforms are starting to take some responsibility,
Yeah.
but there's still a long way to go.
Definitely. And educational institutions have a crucial role to play in equipping young people with the critical thinking skills they need to navigate the digital age.
Yes.
We need to be teaching media literacy in schools,
Yes.
starting at a young age.
It's like giving them a superpower, the ability to see through the smoke and mirrors of the online world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about empowering them to be informed,
Well,
engaged citizens
Yeah.
who can contribute to a healthier, more informed society.
So it sounds like we're talking about a kind of cultural shift,
It
a
is.
change in the way we think about and consume information.
It's definitely a cultural challenge,
Yeah.
but it's also a challenge we can overcome
Right.
if we work together
Yeah.
and commit to promoting a more informed and discerning society.
Okay.
And that starts with each of us taking responsibility for the information we consume and share.
Well said.
Thank you.
And speaking of history,
Yes.
let's take a quick trip back in time
Okay.
to see how fake news has evolved alongside communication technology.
Right.
Because as we've been saying, this isn't a new problem.
It's fascinating to see how fake news has adapted and morphed over the centuries,
Right.
always finding new ways to exploit our vulnerabilities and manipulate our perceptions.
Yeah.
Even in the early days of America, before the internet and social media,
Right.
fake news was a potent force.
Okay, so take us back to the beginning.
Right.
What are some early examples of fake news in American history?
Well, one of the earliest and most consequential examples
Okay.
involves the spread of misinformation about Native Americans.
Okay.
During the colonial era, European settlers often relied on exaggerated or completely fabricated stories about Native American tribes
Right.
to justify their displacement and violence against them.
It's a tactic as old as time. Demonize your enemy,
Right.
make them seem less than human,
Yeah,
and suddenly it's easier to justify atrocities.
exactly. These false narratives painted Native Americans as savages,
Right.
barbarians,
Wow.
or even demonic figures,
Wow.
which helped to dehumanize them in the eyes of European settlers.
It's heartbreaking to think about the real-world impact of those lies.
It is.
They were used to justify genocide and the theft of land.
And these false narratives persisted for centuries,
Wow!
shaping public opinion and government policies towards Native Americans.
It's a stark reminder of how deeply embedded fake news can become in a society's collective consciousness.
Absolutely.
So, as the country grew and communication technology advanced,
Yeah.
did fake news evolve as well?
Absolutely. The invention of the printing press in the 15th century
Right,
revolutionized the way information was spread.
right.
And it wasn't long before fake news found its way into print.
So even back then, people were using the latest technology to spread lies and propaganda.
It's a recurring theme throughout history.
And in the 19th century,
Yeah.
the rise of the penny press, with its emphasis on sensationalism and mass appeal,
Right.
led to a surge in the production and consumption of fake news.
It did.
Ah, the penny press.
Yeah.
Wasn't that when newspapers started focusing more on entertainment than accuracy?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're competing for readers.
Right.
And they found that sensational stories, even if they were fabricated or exaggerated, sold more papers.
And it was during this era
Yes.
that we see figures like Edgar Allan Poe dabbling in fake news.
Oh, really?
Wait, Edgar Allan Poe?
Yeah.
The master of macabre literature.
Yeah.
What did he have to do with fake news?
He actually wrote a hoax article
Wow.
for the New York Sun in 1844
Okay.
about a supposed transatlantic balloon flight.
So he was like the original clickbait writer.
You could say that
Wow.
his story was so captivating and believable
Right.
that it fooled many readers
Yeah.
and even caused a sensation in the scientific community.
It's amazing how much power a well-crafted story can have, even if it's completely made up.
It is.
And it seems like this trend of sensationalism continued into the 20th century.
Definitely the rise of yellow journalism in the late 1800s and early 1900s further fueled the spread of fake news.
Yellow journalism.
Yeah.
That's a term I've heard before, but I'm not entirely sure what it means.
Okay.
Can you explain it?
It refers to a style of journalism
Okay.
that prioritizes sensationalism,
Okay.
exaggeration, and often outright fabrication over factual accuracy.
So basically, it's the opposite of responsible journalism. And it played a significant role in shaping public opinion
It did.
and even influencing foreign policy.
Yeah.
One of the most infamous examples is William Randolph Hearst,
Yeah.
a powerful newspaper magnate
Yeah.
who used his publications to stir up anti-Spanish sentiment
Right.
and drum up support for the Spanish-American War in 1898.
Right.
Wasn't there a famous quote attributed to him, something about, "You furnish the pictures, I'll furnish the war"?
That's right.
Yeah.
Although the exact wording of the quote is debated,
Right.
it captures the essence of Hearst's approach to journalism.
Yeah.
He understood the power of images and stories to sway public opinion,
Yeah.
and he wasn't afraid to manipulate the truth to achieve his goals.
It's a chilling example of how fake news can have real-world consequences,
It is
even on a global scale.
the global scale.
And it seems like this pattern continued as new communication technologies emerged.
Absolutely. The advent of radio in the early 20th century
Okay.
created another powerful platform for the spread of misinformation and propaganda.
So instead of just reading fake news, people could now hear it being broadcast directly into their home.
Exactly. And this new medium allowed charismatic figures
Right.
like Father Charles Coughlin
Yeah.
to reach a mass audience
Yeah.
with their messages of hate and intolerance.
Father Coughlin.
Yes.
Wasn't he a Catholic priest who used his radio show to spread anti-Semitic and pro-fascist views?
That's right.
Wow.
He had millions of listeners.
Wow.
And his broadcasts often contained a mix of religious sermons and political commentary,
Right.
laced with conspiracy theories and hateful rhetoric.
It's a reminder of how easily people can be swayed by charismatic figures.
Yeah.
Especially when they're preaching messages that tap into existing prejudices and anxieties.
And the problem wasn't limited to the United States.
Oh, okay.
In Nazi Germany, Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda,
Right.
masterfully exploited the power of radio
Yeah,
to disseminate the Nazi Party's ideology
right.
and demonize its enemies.
It's a dark chapter in history,
It is.
and it shows how easily a totalitarian regime can use communication technology to control the narrative, manipulate the masses.
Absolutely.
And as we move into the mid-20th century, we see television emerge as a dominant force
Yes.
in shaping public opinion and spreading information, both true and false.
Right.
I can already see how television, with its visual power,
Right.
would take fake news to a whole new level.
Absolutely. Television news,
Yeah.
with its moving images and on-the-ground reporting,
Right?
had immediacy and emotional impact that print and radio couldn't match.
And it also opened up new possibilities for manipulation, right?
Yeah.
With staged events and carefully edited footage.
Exactly. During the Cold War, for example,
Okay.
both the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in extensive propaganda campaigns,
Right.
using television to promote their ideologies and demonize their opponents.
Wasn't there also a lot of fear-mongering about communism during that era?
Absolutely. The Red Scare, as it was known,
Right.
was fueled by a combination of legitimate concerns about Soviet expansionism
Right.
and exaggerated or fabricated claims about communist infiltration in American society.
And television played a key role in amplifying those fears.
Yes.
Yes.
Senator Joseph McCarthy's televised hearings in the early 1950s,
Okay.
in which he made unsubstantiated accusations of communist subversion,
Right.
captivated the nation,
Right.
and contributed to a climate of paranoia and suspicion.
It's like a recurring theme throughout history, people in positions of power using fake news to consolidate their control and silence dissent.
That's right.
And as television became more ubiquitous in American homes,
Yeah.
its influence only grew.
The Vietnam
War, for example, was the first major conflict to be televised extensively,
Right.
and the images of violence and chaos
Yeah.
that were broadcast into living rooms across the country
Right.
had a profound impact on public opinion.
They did.
As like people were seeing the horrors of war firsthand,
Right.
which must have been incredibly jarring and disillusioning.
Exactly. And while television brought the war closer to home
Right,
in a way that had never been possible before,
right,
it also opened up new possibilities for manipulation and spin.
right.
The government and the military were very aware of the power of television to shape public perception.
Right,
And they often sought to control the narrative by limiting access to information
right.
and staging events for the cameras.
It's like we're seeing the early stages of what we now call the 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah.
Where the demand for constant content
Right.
sometimes outweighs the need for accuracy and context.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And as cable news channels proliferated in the late 20th century,
Right.
this trend only intensified.
Right.
The line between news and entertainment became increasingly blurred.
Yeah.
And the pressure to attract viewers often led to sensationalism
Right.
and a focus on conflict and controversy.
It's like we're witnessing the gradual erosion of trust in traditional news media.
Yeah.
Setting the stage for the rise of alternative sources of information,
Yeah,
both legitimate and questionable in the internet age.
precisely. And as we move into the late 20th and early 21st centuries,
Right.
the internet and social media emerge as game changers in the world of information,
Right.
creating both unprecedented opportunities and unprecedented challenges.
Right.
But we'll delve deeper into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've traveled through this history of fake news, and it's clear that the internet has ushered in a whole new era.
Yeah, the Wild West of information.
It really is.
It's kind of amazing because while the internet has democratized information in so many ways, it's also created this perfect breeding ground for misinformation to flourish. The speed at which things can go viral, regardless of accuracy,
Right.
is really incredible.
And it's not just the speed, right? It's the sheer volume of information we're bombarded with every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
It feels impossible to process it all, let alone sort the truth from the lies.
It really does. We're drowning in a sea of data,
Right.
and it's easy to feel completely overwhelmed.
Okay, so give us the tools.
Okay.
How do we become those critical news literacy ninjas you mentioned earlier?
Well, one of the most important things
Okay.
is to understand how these online platforms work,
Go. Okay.
how those algorithms we talked about actually function.
Yeah.
You know, they're designed to keep us engaged,
Mhm.
to keep us scrolling and clicking.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that often means prioritizing sensational content over factual accuracy.
So it's not just about being wary of obviously fake news sites. We also need to be critical of the information we're getting from mainstream social media platforms.
Exactly. It's about understanding that these platforms are businesses.
Right.
And their primary goal is to generate profit.
Yeah.
And they do that by keeping us glued to our screens.
So how do we break free from this cycle of clickbait and outrage?
Well, the first step is awareness.
Okay.
Be conscious of the fact that you're being manipulated.
Yep.
that the information you're seeing has been curated and filtered,
Yeah.
and that it doesn't necessarily represent a balanced or accurate view
Yeah.
of the world.
So a healthy dose of skepticism
Hmm.
is key.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And remember those questions we discussed earlier. Who published this information?
Right.
What are their motivations? Who benefits from this story being spread?
Right.
These questions are more relevant than ever in the age of the internet.
And what about those fact-checking websites you mentioned?
Yeah.
Are they still reliable in this constantly evolving online landscape?
Fact-checking sites like Snopes, PolitiFact, factcheck.org.
Right.
These can be incredibly valuable resources.
Okay.
They do the hard work of investigating claims and providing evidence-based analysis.
But can't they be biased too?
Well, it's a valid concern.
Okay.
No source is perfectly objective, but these reputable fact-checking organizations have a strong track record of transparency and accountability.
Okay.
They cite their sources, they correct errors,
Right.
and they make your methodologies clear.
So it's about using them as a tool in our critical thinking arsenal rather than blindly accepting everything they say.
Exactly. It's all about triangulation.
Okay.
Compare the information from fact-checking sites
All right.
with reporting from multiple credible news outlets
Okay.
to get a more well-rounded understanding of the issue.
This might sound a bit paranoid, but is there anything we should be doing to protect ourselves from online manipulation beyond just being more critical of the information we consume?
It's not paranoia.
Okay.
It's being a savvy digital citizen.
Okay.
And yes, there are some practical steps you can take to safeguard your online experience.
Okay.
Be mindful of the information you share about yourself online.
Right.
Think twice before you click on links or download files from unfamiliar sources.
So it's like practicing good digital hygiene?
Exactly.
Okay.
And be cautious about accepting friend requests
Right.
or following accounts that you don't recognize.
Yeah.
They could be bots or fake accounts designed to spread misinformation.
It's amazing how much we have to be on guard these days. It feels like a constant battle against the forces of manipulation.
It can feel that way at times. But, remember, we're not powerless.
Right.
By developing our critical thinking skills
Uh-huh.
and adopting these strategies,
Yeah.
we can become more resilient to online manipulation
Right.
and contribute to a healthier information environment.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What's the one thing you want them to remember from this deep dive into the world of fake news?
The key is to be an active participant in your own information consumption.
Okay.
Don't be a passive recipient of whatever the algorithms throw at you.
Okay.
Question everything.
Yeah.
Verify information.
Right.
And be mindful of the forces that are trying to shape your perceptions.
It's about taking control of our own information diets,
Yeah.
choosing to nourish ourselves with knowledge from trusted sources, rather than filling up on empty calories of clickbait and outrage.
I love that. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And remember, this isn't just about protecting ourselves.
Right.
It's about protecting our democracy, our communities, and our shared sense of reality.
It's a fight worth fighting. And on that note, I'll leave you with a final thought.
Okay.
If fake news has been around for centuries, as we've discussed,
Right.
what does that tell us about human nature?
Mm.
Are we inherently susceptible to believing things that aren't true?
Yeah.
Or is there something about our modern world, about the way we consume information,
Yeah.
that makes us particularly vulnerable? That's something for you to ponder as you continue your journey as a discerning consumer of information.
That's a great question.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed,
Yes.
and most importantly, stay critical.